committee order. Before we begin, I have some personal remarks I'd like to make. Received an email from Aubrey Shepherd, who is a member of the Telecommunication Board, complaining that I haven't sent him a personal email informing him of when this meeting will be held. And that it was my duty to do so on occasion. As soon as we were able to schedule a time that we could all meet, I asked staff to provide a copy of that information to the city clerk and get it on the calendar on the city webpage. And it was disseminated within an hour by the city clerk. Now, every citizen and resident and people in Oklahoma, for that matter, can go on the city webpage and subscribe to all the newsletters and notices and everything that comes out of the county clerk's office. And my assumption is that people qualified to be on the Telecommunication Board would have done that. But that appears not to be the case. The second thing in Mr. Shepherd's email was that I should have run a notice in the Northwest Arkansas Times for 3 days about this meeting. I hardly know how to respond to that. City policy is to provide electronic notice. The cost of printing notices in a monopoly newspaper far exceed the budget of this committee, which as far as I know is $0. And I don't think that's done with any of the other voluntary advisory committees. And I do not apologize for not running 3 ads in the local newspaper. The rest of his email did not deal with me directly, but made a number of demands and allegations which I will not respond to because I don't think they deserve a response. And as part of that, let me apologize, as I think I have already, for responding to emails outside of this committee meeting. Some people send rather provocative emails to a list of 20 people, some with often inaccurate stuff or questions about the operation of this board. And I think I responded to a couple of those, and I never should have, that our business ought to be done in public and ought to be done in these meetings rather than on private email lists, and I'll not do that again. Okay, any other announcements or comments before?
Can I make a comment?
Sure, for what purpose?
I was just going to mention that this meeting was announced in today's paper, and I believe Mr. Aubrey was speaking about the free announcement section in the paper. I don't think he was referring to ads.
I wasn't privileged for that distinction. One of the things that happens in the city is periodic looking at the authority for this committee and the ordinance that sets it up. And that changes over time as technology changes. And it has been an interesting evolution both in the telecommunication environment as well as what's going on in this committee. I first began my involvement in public access in 1984 as a member of the Fayetteville Open Channel Board and previously served on this board. And it has taken a number of turns. And I think it may be time now to look at what the ordinance requires and what we're doing. And there are a number of things that we're not doing. And some of those may be because we're delinquent in following the ordinance, and some of them may be because we cannot do it because we don't have capacity, time, or expertise to do it. But a couple of things in the code 33209 under procedures, it requires that the Telecommunication Board shall provide the City Council an annual report briefly summarizing the previous year's activities and outlining its goals for next year. I requested a copy of those annual reports from former chairman, and it's my understanding they do not exist, or at least have not for several years. But we've been derelict in doing that. And also requires a quarterly report to the City Council on contract compliance. And I don't think we've been doing those in recent years. So I just note that the chair can keep those things. I don't think the City Council is going to be getting rid of them. But we have to do that. There is a definitional gap, I think. There's a definition of what telecommunications infrastructure is, but there's not a definition of what a telecommunications provider is. And I don't know if that means the cable and phone companies and internet companies, or if that means the PEG channels. That may be something that could be clarified. There is a, as I find it here, without my glasses, I apologize for that. Identify the telecommunication needs and solutions in the city and find innovative, appropriate approaches to use expanded digital capacity. I don't think we've specifically done that. The city has contracted and is spending thousands of dollars for an IT assessment, which would go beyond anything that the members of this committee would have the time and expertise to do. So that may be a superfluous part of the ordinance. That's a wonderful thing in a wonderful world, but in another world, it's probably not going to happen. There are two parts in 3310 section B where it says the duties and responsibilities shall be to oversee the administration of the PEG facility and oversee the administration of all television channels. My understanding from reading the opinions of the city attorney is oversee doesn't mean that you go in, you're not the overseer, you don't go in and give orders to staff. And start telling what to do. What that means is that you monitor what's going on so you can report on that to the city council. So that may be language that needs to be clarified to reflect the opinions of the city attorney. Under 33210B4, it says facilitate dispute resolution concerning PEG channels, including not limited to operations, program content, track those complaints to assure that telecommunication providers, and this is where it sort of switches from PEG channels to telecommunications providers, are responding to complaints in an effective, timely manner. So I don't know. I mean, I assume we want all cable channels to respond in a timely manner, but also the cable companies and telephone companies. So I don't know if that's can be. Originally, in the previous ordinance, you might have noticed that The disputes that the board to deal with would be with complaints about program content or access to the facilities. And those are, in fact, the essential reasons why we have a telecommunication board, is to assure that there's no interference with First Amendment rights of citizens wishing to get on public access and have access to the materials. And because the city council either cannot or should not be in a position of doing that. So we have that. Those are sort of some of the things that I look at, and I don't know what your pleasure is. We should try to identify other things or go through it item by item. I will say my reading of the city council is that they would be more likely to abolish this board than to expand its authority at this time. But that's just something to keep in mind. It shouldn't limit your imagination. Have other things to do. But as Marvin testified before the city council when he was a member of this board, that it was almost a full-time job to try to do everything on here. And part of that is because there are a lot of requirements on here, and part of that is because the board chose to do a lot of things that aren't on here. But I don't think they're going to go for your suggestion to have salaries for telecommunication board members. So that might be a consideration. I think they have spoken twice on public forums on the government channel, but that's not covered in here. That's a policy. And I think you have to be cognizant of what the city council will do in their response. It doesn't mean you can't urge them to think in new directions, but I think you should try to anticipate the realistic situation. So, what's your pleasure, John?
I think we should, in my opinion, I think we should take a look at each point and maybe just speak briefly. There's some points in here that as a member, I'm confused on still, so I can there's some clarity that can be added in there. At least in the duty section, take a look at those. And maybe there's some things that shouldn't be on here anymore. Like the development and maintenance of the city's telecommunication infrastructure, has Ehrig ever been provided by this board to the city council on that, or a recommendation?
As far as I'm aware, the last time any kind of needs assessment or survey was done was in 1999. So well over 10 years. Yes, ma'am.
You ready?
Sure.
I did bring this up to the chair at that time, which was Aubrey Shepherd early last year, and I was encouraging him as chair to do the report. I never did hear back from him. I encouraged at least 3 times, but he did report to me. As long as he's been on the board, he doesn't remember one of those reports ever being made by the board. He's not here today. And I have not found any, and I'm sure it has an item that the board ever done before.
Well, let's go through then the duties of 2 Kinzer. All committee members have copies of that. We shall advise the city council and make recommendations. issues, including one, use and administration of cable TV channels designated for public access, education, and government statements. Any problem with that? Use and administration of telecommunications facilities and use of public rights of way for telecommunication infrastructure. I'm not quite sure what this board, as an advisory board of city council, can do on the administration of or use of public rights of way. The legislature 2 years ago passed a statute that anyone who had use of the right of way could do anything they wanted to without coming to the city. The city was trying to have a conversation at EP Swepco about those giant metal poles that ran across Dixon Street down by the Gregg House to the North Pole. And instead of doing that, they just got one of their friends in the legislature to introduce a bill saying they didn't have to have a hearing on it. So I'm not sure what the council might expect from us in that area.
I'm not entirely sure what they mean by telecommunications facilities either.
That's one of the things that's not clear to me. Like I mean, we have the telecommunication infrastructure definition here, but
I understand the use and administration of the PEG facility,
Yeah.
but we're not going to go over and tell Cox Communications how to do anything.
All right. No, we can't, but I don't think we can respond to it. Ms. Smith, do you have?
Can you recognize?
Of course.
The way the city is also functioning on that point, so you should know, there are different departments. In the city of Fayetteville for a number of years, there is a department called Parking and Telecommunications. Now, if you're going to parse out words with telecommunications, I mean, that's sharing crossing, they do parking, they do phone systems, they do what the radio program that people listen to when they call in. It's pretty expansive. It's a whole different department. They are not anywhere linked to this board or anything. I found that interesting myself. I'm in communications, and whoever was the public information officer or the manager of the television center is over the center there. We called it the Telecommunications Board, but Fritz, the communication department, the television center, is not linked officially in the city of Fayetteville to the word telecommunications. It's down here on the bottom floor, and it's with the Parking and Telecommunications Department.
is parking and telecommunications, or telecommunications linked at all to IT in the city?
No, different department. You might be looking at a name change.
Yes.
It should be.
Well, I don't think we're charged to advise the mayor on how to organize the city. We're charged with advising the city council.
I believe that would be a proper recommendation, that there be coordination with that department.
So noted. Reports submitted to the city by a cable TV operator, pay channel user, telecommunication agency. Did any telecommunication agencies actually report anything to the city? Does the FCC send us a deal?
Not that one.
So, I mean, on item 4, has this, it's never happened? No one's,
I'm not aware of what would encompass a PEG channel user.
No, that's probably Joey Dutton. He submitted lots of reports.
True. cable TV operator would only be the one operator that we have that the city is franchised with, which is Cox Communications. AT&T Uverse, who operates the Uverse system, this might help in terms of context, do not consider themselves legally to be a cable operator. They consider themselves to be a telephone company under different regulations, different laws. And if I may, I believe this is a very opportune time to be looking at these things, and the questions that you brought up, Michael, were very appropriate. Is what is telecommunications? There's a lot of questions still being asked on a federal and state level as to what that is. There's a lot of legal wrangling going on at this time in legislatures all across the country, as well as on a federal level, because of the technology is, Mr. Chairman said this a minute ago, has changed tremendously. And so if AT&T is a telephone company that you can get TV from, Cox is a cable company that you can get telephone from, why are all these distinctions being made? And how does it affect the city? And I don't know where this board would come in to try to redefine the scope of this board to help the city council with those issues.
Not that, but on forward, it's just that we should be able to make recommendations on the issues that might be on your report that comes to us. If the city council refers the report to us, I suppose we can take a whack at it. I mean, so I think it's debilitating. We'll have to go out and try to find them in the Library of Congress.
I better answer that question too, just so y'all have this piece of information.
You're right.
But if the question, and thank you, if the question is, does the city have contact with telecommunication companies? Well, of course. Very often it's with David Jergens, who's the director of our utilities department. You have to realize a lot of this, what deals with cities and what they're given, it deals with easements. We're talking about, John Coleman and the sustainability group making sure when they dig lines for poles that they put the dirt back. We have a stream side protection ordinance. Are they putting a silk fence up? So the question is huge. Yeah, we contact them, but it might be about dirt. Okay, not about the the purchasing department contacts with them regularly. Possibly even animal services. There might be something wrong. Dogs frequently chewing wire or something.
Back in 2000, it looks like Alta, in this memo, Alta and Caprock Telecommunications was applying for franchises in Fayetteville. Is that, was Alta considered a cable operator or a?
No. No, they were not considered any kind of even television services operator.
Okay.
I think they were looking at trying to establish some local telephone service at that time. So they would have to apply for franchise agreement with the city if they were going to use NEC rights of way for that.
So there's really only one, Cox.
Only one cable operator, yes. And they actually have ever only been the only one. The same cable operator actually has, through different name changes and different ownership, but the same. It's essentially with Warner Cable back in 1989, who was pretty much the original franchise agreement, which is still one of the winning operator under now. And then that was purchased by a different group, and that group, through different ownership changes, has eventually morphed into Cox Communication. But we still operate under the same franchise agreement that we had with Warner Cable back in 1989.
Number 5, make recommendations on funding public access education and government operation. See a problem with us making recommendations on that as long as we have sufficient information. I don't know, the educational channel, we don't fund it all. It's our government channel and the public access channel. We should make recommendations of this. And we're in a position to know what the needs are if they share those with us. Funding for development and maintenance of the city's telecommunication infrastructure.
Do we have the expertise to do that?
I don't, but you might.
Yeah, I'm in IT, but I can't make recommendations for a city the size of Fayetteville. We have consultants.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's one, then we'll put a question on. Number 7, performance of any cable or telecommunication operator serving the city with regard to rates, customer service, technical standards, programming, and requirements of the applicable franchise agreement. I think the board does that on a fairly regular basis.
We hear complaints from citizens about cable services.
Yeah.
Or I guess Fritz does.
But do we advise the city council on those?
If I may.
Sure.
It's my understanding that at this time, we may need to revise this a little bit with consultation with the city attorney. I don't believe that the city has any authority anymore or influence anymore with the operators in terms of rates, in terms of setting rates. I think that was
That's true.
was done away with, so that might be something. And also the programming, I don't believe we have. The franchise agreement does state that the cable operator will provide the 3 access channels. Beyond that, I don't think that the city itself has any.
Yeah, I mean, well, that I
capabilities in
think
terms
is our
of-
main concern, whether or not they show home shopping or worldwide wrestling or whatever's really not anything we have any control over or should, as far as I'm concerned.
And that may be a holdover from previous, even back to the cable board days, because back then, cities did have influence and capability of affecting programming choices on cable systems through the franchise agreements, and that's not something that's available to cities anymore.
Well, I guess, I mean, we can always, give a report to city council, say they jacked up the rates again, they moved the channels, it's not a violation of the contract.
And telecommunications operator here would include the phone companies?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah.
It's a little bit
It's a
inconsistent.
very vague term. I'm not sure exactly what the ordinance means by that term.
Okay, well, let's mark that for further study. Renewal of any franchise agreement between a telecommunications agent and the city.
Jump around the terms a lot.
Yeah, well, the renewal on the franchise agreement, I suppose if there's a franchise agreement to be signed and renewed, that we would advise city council what we're talking about. The Cox is still operating on a year-to-year rollover from the last century. So they don't.
If I may, the
Sure.
newer members of the board may not have been aware of this. There was, from the board, a suggestion, I believe it was in late 2009 or early 2010, at an agenda session that the city council actually put together a study group to actually look at the current franchise. And at that time, the city council declined to do so.
Well, in my previous incarnation on this board, Marvin remember this, we went through long and tedious negotiations with Cox, but in the end, the only leverage the city might have would be to take over operation of cable system. I didn't think my reading of the council was they didn't have the interest or the will to do that. So, can ask them to do that.
We did have an opportunity to pressure them with the threat of a lawsuit, which we didn't do.
City attorney was going to sue them?
Well, the idea was that we would have used an outside attorney with expertise in that process. And if we had done that, it would have probably made a difference. And you could probably still crank that up. And we had developed what was called an assessment of the cable.
How would you fund a lawsuit?
I'm sorry?
You had required appropriation from the, or budget adjustment from the city council to fund a lawsuit.
At that time, we had it estimated at $30,000 that we were going to pay an attorney from Minnesota. But often that is the way that you have to deal with cable companies.
Well, I mean, I guess that's one thing for the board to consider if we want to be in the business of bringing lawsuits with cable companies, or
Aren't we in the risk of losing that franchise fee? I mean, that outweighs any potential benefit for a lawsuit, I would think. Because y'all had talked about rewriting the franchise agreement in the past, right? And then realized that we would lose out on some amount of money.
Essentially, the advice of the city attorney to the city council was that at this time, the franchise agreement that we have, which was written, which was entered into in 1989 and has been continued on a month-to-month basis since its original term, that because it was done at that time, that the city actually, under that franchise agreement, has more, some more authorities and a little bit more power over in this relationship than than the city would be able to have if that franchise was renegotiated at this time, because of a lot of the changes on the federal level determining what cities have authority, municipalities have authority over to demand from cable operators, and also the authorities that cable operators have. A lot of that has changed since that franchise agreement was written. So the city attorney said, and the council agreed that they're not interested in examining the franchise agreement at this time.
well, I think, you know, if we find an instance where they are in violation of the franchise agreement, it's an appropriate thing to advise the city council about.
Mr. Chairman, if I may on this, now, is it Conway the only city that owns its cable?
Conway and Paracool.
Fayetteville. They find it a revenue producer still?
They went in on the ground floor, put it in years and
It
years
was
ago.
never owned by us.
Sort of a break-even deal. They didn't have to take it by eminent domain, float bonds to buy it. And we advise on renewal of any franchise agreements. I don't see any problem with that, but that would be something the board could do. Section B. My only suggestion was to change the language to reflect the definition from the city attorney's office on her position on B1, on oversee.
We can use a better word there because of the confusion in the past.
Yeah.
Some form of monitor the report.
Yeah. And the same on 2, I suppose.
On B2, the telecommunication, it's, there's an instance, whether they administered by the city or contracted, the Telecommunication Board shall facilitate the creation of policies regarding cablecast material selection, time guidelines, for cablecast material viewer and facilitate user complaint. Facilitate, what?
Well, I think that's a good question, and that's one that was raised before, whether or not the board should undertake doing all these things on their own, or just to encourage and ensure that they have them. I think there's been a difference of opinion on the board. Some people thought that the board should do it all themselves, and others thought they should do it in conjunction with the staff.
Can we facilitate these things by, I mean, do we, or at least facilitating by the city staff doing it?
Yeah, let's work on the language here. I think you're right. Regarding cablecast material selection, time guidelines, those are all covered by the contract.
So if we're doing the contract review, then everything's covered.
Yeah. The 3, are we ready to move on to 3?
Oh, sir.
Yes.
I have a question that I would ask the board to look at, or this committee to look at. And what is that, what does it entail then it says the telecommunications board shall ensure contract compliance?
Obviously, we have no authority to act.
Yeah, well, we can just, if we find that they're in violation, then we can notify the city attorney and take legal action if they don't choose to voluntarily comply.
I just didn't know if the board would want to look at the wording of that as well, in terms of, as you go through it, and we're identifying areas where it seems to be somewhat confusing in some board choice. Or
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons we get the monthly reports from the contractor and make sure they're meeting their obligations. And they seem to be doing that this year, but in the past, they were blatantly out of compliance, and there was never any, I mean, I think they, trained like 3 people a couple of years ago.
It seems like 3 could be interpreted very broadly, all contracts relating to telecommunications. It seems like, I mean, if the city, for the city staff, I mean, you also had a contract with AT&T to provide your cell phone service for the city staff. I mean, that seems like that, I could interpret it as that. Am I the only one?
Yeah, at least, I mean, I think that is with regard to the contractor for use of the peg channels, but I don't think we have to go down and look at the AT&T franchise quarterly and advise city council.
I would almost delete that first line and move the rest of paragraph 3 up to paragraph 2.
That's a good idea.
Then I think it's very clear that what actual telecommunications is.
And then I'll include that in our recommendations. Ready to move on to 4, facilitate dispute resolution. That doesn't mean that we handle those directly in the first instance. Regarding the operations of program content, that I think the complaint process that's been recently approved is in shape on that. The word facilitate again, I think is imprecise. Perhaps the SARS should service better.
And on point 4, we're to track the complaints filed by citizens to ensure that telecommunications providers are responding to complaints. Is that, complaints that they're filing directly with Cox?
The ones that yeah, we refer a number of complaints to Cox. I don't know if there's any follow-up on those. Do they respond back to us?
The complaints that I received from residents regarding issues with cable provider, I've been following the new rules that were created. And the last one I received, we did get a response. I did get a response back from both the complainant and from Cox Communication regarding what their response was and what they were doing to resolve the conflict.
But the way this is written, it'd also be anybody's got a complaint with their phone company or their long distance provider or their cell phone company or their internet provider that we feed.
That's also, I think, it's our responsibility to track that. Maybe responsibility is not the best word. I mean, I think the city staff is better equipped to keep track of things like that. I mean, we meet once a month.
Let me do a quick reminder, and again, as one of my roles as public information officer, just like Susan Thomas, was on the Cox bill for sure, because AT&T is moving from being just a phone company. I mean, it's not on there yet. But if you get your Cox bill, you'll see Lindsley Smith now, and that was just something that rolled over there. I mean, does it cause a lot of calls from Cox? I don't like getting the History Channel. I want my bundling to do better. So I do spend time with them saying, well, this is, you know, a private company issue. And so I do get complaints like that. But the ones that actually deal with something that can go with the purview, well, usually what I'll do is get, well, actually, I think I send every single one. I'm probably Kelly Zaga is the public information officer for Cox. And so we're right in tune, speed dial with each other. They know about everything like no matter what.
Well, I mean, if this is interpreted that we have to run around with somebody doesn't like their Verizon or Cricket or whoever is doing their cell phones, I have other things to do in my volunteer time.
Yeah.
But it sounds like that's a better business bureau activity.
Well, I think with regard to the cable, that they have a contract with the city or a franchise, then that gives us some instance. But you know, this just says telecommunication providers, and they're springing up and down like dandelions. So I think that
There's really no effective way to do this.
yeah. Anyway, that needs to be tweaked. Number 5, promote public awareness, use, and viewership of the PEG channels. Well, after Ann said the mayor could pepper it on Facebook, I put it on my Facebook. But didn't get any comments. I don't have any friends. But that's something that, you know, I try to do when I'm talking to people or encourage them to make programs on issues and things. That's why I went through the training, so I can tell them what's involved in that too. But I guess, and that's as a board what we can do that on our budget. I don't see a problem with it. 6 is a laudable goal. It's beyond my capacity. There are probably other people on the board who...
Expanding digital capacity. What does that mean?
Keep in mind, this was written in 2003. So, I mean, at that time, there was a lot of discussion in many municipalities about free Wi-Fi access, broadband internet initiatives. So, I mean, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, there was a lot of concern about how this was going to play out in terms of cable companies getting into the internet business, telephone companies getting into the video business. And I think when we talk about expanding digital capacity, we were just We just had an event the beginning part of this year, late last year, that was a very specific example of that. Cox Communications, as they have updated their technology and they create more and more digital channels in their infrastructure, they made the decision to eliminate our access channels from the analog band of the cable system and move them to the digital band of the cable system. So we were directly affected by this, quote, expanding digital capacity. I don't know that it continues to, I'm sure it does continue to expand, but I think that the context of that whole thing, looking at it from a perspective of 8-9 years ago, we see that happen, but how this board might be able to
I don't know. I mean,
define innovative approaches.
I mean, we could put up, a survey monkey and ask people what they think their needs are and stuff, and we'll get some fantastic responses in all the sense of the word. That would cost about 4 times the city budget to implement. I don't see the city running door-to-door fiber optic for everybody.
Could you draw the conclusion that that would include social media and recommendations on the effective use of social media?
Seems like it could also include things, because, telecommunication means we could identify that the fire department needs a higher bandwidth connection to the police department. It's that open. Which I don't feel is, I don't have the time to look at that. Was the IT assessment, in the IT assessment that the city did, was...
I think that does have a lot of information about exactly what you're saying, to looking at that point. And I guess one of the questions that I still have and am confused about, and I hope that this committee can help identify, is what is the city being the city of Fayetteville administration, and what is the city being the entire city of Fayetteville geographic region, all of the citizens and residents that live here. There was a point in time that there were some really serious conversations, and I think they ran into budget issues, about the city possibly being on the forefront of a total broadband initiative that would supply broadband internet service to every resident of Fayetteville in one form or another. We've run into budgetary issues and things like that, but I think that's something that we've seen in this discussion today is these definitions, and I'm confused as I go forward with some of this, is what is city, like you just said, are we looking at the fire department? Are we looking at internal of the city administration and the operations of that? Are we looking external at the city as a whole? And which one's which in some of these issues? Specific to number 6, I hope I helped put a little bit of that into context.
So I assume that's something that comes up in conversation all the time, like getting this need. But we don't get it in this need, here's how we're going to pay for it. And, I think we ought to deal with things that we can do without stifling innovation in other ways. Anyway, identifying the telecommunication needs and solutions in the city is really beyond the capacity of the volunteer board.
I think we could review them if
Yeah,
the city, if the city came up with some assessment or something like that, we could review them and get citizen feedback.
Would you put on our next agenda that we request a copy of the IT assessment? Or ask staff if they can run down a copy. It's not within the purview of this committee, but it would be the board.
Kind of just on that, just back so you know, the communication department also, Julie McQuaid and I, we're not just all about communication through a television. Through just a few of us, it's every press release, every FOIA request, every press conference, every press person goes through me. I mean, there's, we've done in the last year YouTubing. We've got cities in the state are contacting us, and Julie's going down to Fort Smith. We've done seminars. They're calling Fayetteville and saying, we want to start doing social media. Y'all are the top in the state. Fayetteville right now, the city of Fayetteville, is #1 in the state. And their city council passed the social media resolution. And that's what we have been following. That's what all staff does, 100%. Our job is to do essentially what we're told by the legislative branch and everything. I really hope that you recognize that we are a national award winner as one of the top few in the nation in social media. So when you look at, wow, where could the city of Fayetteville go? My first response is look at Access Fayetteville and see where we are first. Because everybody's looking at Access Fayetteville around the nation, and they're calling us on a pretty regular basis and saying, help us do it. And we're actually having meetings. Julie's sitting down with them, telling them how to set things up. We're spending a lot of time with that. She's about to go back down to Fort Smith and everything. So we are on the forefront.
Number 7. Thank you. Number 7, promote public awareness of telecommunication policy issues. Does that anticipate some kind of active program, or?
Matt, in terms of the board's purview of advising the city council, I would say that in an understanding of at least telecommunications policy issues as they apply to access television and those types of issues might be wise, or might be something the board would want to be aware of and try to develop some type of an advisory position for the council. So the council might be able to determine whether they want to take particular action or not. I know there are some issues that are really coming to the fore in the state of Arkansas, probably in the next year, 18 months to 24 months.
Right.
So.
Providers want to take away the franchise authority of the city.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's one way out of.
Now, whether that says promote public awareness of them, or you decide to change that to be aware of these issues, or advise the city council on public or on telecommunication policy.
I think Section B is part of that is like specific duties in addition to advising. So, yeah, I mean, we do need to track that, and maybe we're invite somebody to be on the agenda sometime to discuss it. And then forward, number 8 is forward the report for renewal or replacement of cable or telecommunications no less than 45 days before the contract's expiration. Do we have a schedule of when these expire?
I don't know what the
Mr. Chairman.
definition of cable or telecommunications agent is.
Yes, Mr. Bemis?
Only to, there is I believe, a contract expiring in December. UVerse contract with AT&T. That's my understanding anyway. That was written, and it will. Is that these folks have seen it? I'm sure the city must be working on that. That was mentioned in one of the board meetings.
Kit had just provided it to me. Fritz has it ready to go out in the October 10th packet to you. This is something that the city attorney drafts. Obviously, Don Moore's working on that as well. It's planned to go. Anyway, Kit's got all that done. I have asked him to actually come to the Telecom Board meeting so we can actually have our city attorney for the city of Fayetteville at that meeting on the date. If not, he'll give me information.
Does anybody know when the annual expiration of the Cox contract is?
It doesn't.
It's nothing.
Okay.
I think this is another one that seems open. Telecommunications agent could be the cell phones that the city uses, I mean, all of which I really think we need to take out.
I mean, this is really a forward-looking document at the time it was drafted, but it sort of did not anticipate the way the media developed, and it did anticipate a huge bureaucratic staff to do all these things.
I mean, like if you have a contract, let's say you sign up for a YouTube channel that costs extra, I mean, what's the telecommunication board have anything to do with me looking at that contract renewal? It seems like it could be open to that now.
We hang it on there, so I guess it's a free service, but, you know, right now,
Or
but who knows, it could.
Flickr,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Typically, those go straight from, if there's going to be a contract on something like that, they might go straight from the city attorney's office to the purchasing department. Did they do an analysis of how much is the bid out on it? Does it reach a certain level, and do they have to bid it out, or can they just give a contract to somebody? Yeah, what go?
but I think we need to clarify go back to what city administration stuff and what city as a whole.
Well, there are situations, for example, we have a company, it's called Granicus, that provides services for the city in terms of all of the meetings that we cover are available video on demand, and then also legislative management services in terms of agenda publishing and availability. That service, we're looking at it at hopefully, if the city council agrees to provide the budget, we're looking at hoping to expand those services. But is that something that this board would be wanting to always be having to look at? A contract that the city has with a provider, and I think that's one of the things that has been, again, advising the city council. Should we keep it or should we not? That's a lot of work for boards.
Can I make a comment?
Briefly?
I see nothing wrong with leaving open the possibility of making recommendations about almost anything that has to do with telecommunications. And this ordinance was changed back in 2000 from being a cable board ordinance to one being a telecommunications board, because it was seen that cable was in some ways becoming less important and dominant in the communication, that a lot of things were going to be going over to the internet, and that was one of the reasons why the name was changed to telecommunications. I see no harm in leaving open the possibility of this board making any recommendation that they happen to have some insight on for whatever reason. And I think it includes both the city and the city community at large. It doesn't need to be limited.
And I agree that the board will probably make any recommendations that they want.
Well, I will say, I mean, Motorola, the radios we have now with the police department, they don't make them anymore. They are so old, we're in the process of getting more. It's a multi-million-dollar contract with staff going to Washington, D.C. I mean, to actually talk with senators and others to try to get funding, try to get grants, etc. This deals with, the satellite, the radios, etc. It probably touches on every single department. But, I mean, the point I think being made is, do you want to chime in on it, even though you have no authority to go in and say anything that the police department does?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, one thing.
Just a minute. You recognize.
Mr. Geisler, the Granicus contract, I think we're sort of captive to that since they have our archives. Is that right?
No, they do not have our archives.
They don't?
No, we archive in the television center. We have a copy of everything that we produce. They do store the online, And I would never support, I don't think the city would ever support contracting with an organization that would ever be able to hold the city hostage for anything like that. So we have all of the archives available. If somebody wanted to go back and look at a city council meeting from 1998, they can go back and we can make them a DVD copy of it from what we have at the Relevant Center.
I don't want to, I want to wrap this up at 1 o'clock. Are there any problems with the purpose and intent, creation and composition of the board, officers, staff support provisions? I didn't have any except for I thought we need some additional definitions, or at least we need to have some that we work with. But I don't know if it has to be in the ordinance or not, but at least the language of the ordinance ought to be defined. It's going to keep jumping around. Are there any other items you want members of the committee like to raise today? Okay, well, what, with leave the committee, what I would anticipate doing is summarizing these discussions and trying to come up with some language on the parts that we identified, and then having another meeting before making your recommendations to the telecommunication. And I would encourage other members of the board or the public, if you have suggestions on this, I'd be glad to entertain them in an open meeting with the board. But don't be sending them to me. You can send them to me by email if you want to, but don't expect a response. Mr. Pennington, we adjourn. Is there a second? Non-debatable motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you other board members and members of the public who are here today. I'll try to have that for you by the quarterly. Mr. Cox there, where we are.
Social media.
I guess it'd be about time to make a quarterly report.
And he was very pink glasses.
What?
You got time for me to make a quarterly report?
Well, that's what I was
quarter.
thinking. We might just gather up the reports we get.
That's what I was going to do.
Make a sandwich out of it in the city council.
Who would that be?
City clerk.
You can forward that to the city clerk and request that it be distributed to the members.
They probably would know what to do with it.
I'm sure they'll be very pleasantly surprised to see a nice cover memo from the chair of the Telecom Board, Telecom Board that says this is what we're communicating with you.
Yeah.
Should the